I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and you can hold your applause. Uh, and I grew up in a predominantly African-American community in the municipalities of North County of St. Louis called Wellston. Wellston was a community of about 4,000 people. In the smaller part of the county, St. Louis is separated into municipalities and then the bigger city. But there are all these little hamlets, these little dots. Kinloch, Pine Lawn, University City, and then there's Wellston. And Wellston was a place of community, of family, of a place actually where I hadn't been very far from Wellston for the better part of my life. Because everything I needed was there. Everything. So all the people I cared about were there. All the teachers, the friends, the family, the shopping, churches, everything right there. But there was a larger community out there somewhere. You know that song, Somewhere Out There. So there was all this somewhere out there. But I didn't care about somewhere out there. All I cared about was Wellston. Because that's all I needed to care about. And as I began to think over the course of my life, I'm at 58 now, I started thinking, did we have any Hispanic or Latino people in Wellston? And the answer was no. Did we have any Native American people that I knew of in Wellston? Once again, the answer was no. Did we have anyone from an Asian community in Wellston? And the answer was yes. We had these corner fried rice kitchens, and we had several in Wellston, and we would frequent those kitchens for a small box of inexpensive fried rice or noodles or whatever. We never asked them how their day was going. They never asked us how our day was going. We just made a financial exchange in those relationships, and life went on. And so over the course of my life, I started to think, man, how did I get a sense? How did I learn? How did I get what I call a perspective of value for people who were not from Wellston? How did I know who they were? How did I know anything about them? Now, of course, there were people who were, you could say, Caucasian or white in St. Louis, but I didn't know any of them. But figured one day I might. But I did have some help. My mom, in between jobs, she'd come home about 2:30, and she'd come home and she'd plop down on the couch and she'd veg out before she went to her next cleaning job. And she would turn on the television, and I would get to watch Days of Our Lives. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Huh? Because as I looked at the screen, there were people on the screen that were not from Wellston. But I did know that there were some in St. Louis like the people on the screen. And so I began to learn about these people from Days of Our Lives. Isn't that beautiful? And so I say that to say, as we begin this conversation about finding common ground, maybe, just maybe, there's somebody in the room here who kind of grew up maybe like me, in a sense of cultural isolation, around people who they felt very comfortable with, because there was no need to care about anybody else. And now, as we are adults, and as we begin to think about this whole diversity thing and inclusion thing and all this, how do we come to grips with the fact that maybe, just maybe, the information that we have received, the information we have gained, right or wrong, may not give us the best perspective of value for people who might be different than us? So many of you have said, and many of you have heard. If you have children, you told your kids, and maybe someone told you, don't talk to strangers. Anybody? Huh? Now, why do we say that? Well, we would say, you would say to me that, John, we probably say that because it's a protection mechanism, right? Huh? We're leery of people who are not from where we're from. And we want to make sure our kids don't venture into those unseemly environs, if you will. Okay? Don't talk to strangers. And just think about this. And you've done this before. And I got a 2-year-old grandson. And what happens is he doesn't spend a whole lot of time with my wife and I. At least not initially. And so for all intents and purposes, we were strangers. He spent all the time with my daughter and my son-in-law. And so when he would come to the house, they would want him to hug us and to love us and to do all these things. But how could he? When for all intents and purposes, like everybody else, we were strangers. And you know what happens when parents do to kids? They'll tell them don't talk to strangers, and then they'll get around a bunch of strangers and go, okay, Billy, go ahead. Hug them. Love on them. And the kid, cowers behind the back leg of mom or dad. Well, what do we expect? And then the question becomes, as that child moves from infancy into adolescence and then into adulthood, at what point in time and what institutions help this child to understand that everybody, well, not that everybody's not a stranger still, but at what point do we become more familiar? So therein lies the challenge. Here you are working with this diverse group of people. Here we all are living in this increasingly growing city of Lincoln, Nebraska. Many of you who are here for a long time, you realize that Lincoln has changed for better or for worse, depending on your perspective. Okay? But are these folks strangers? Are they strangers? And if they are strangers, how do they become familiar? So therein is the journey, my friends, of what I call finding common ground.